have a conversation today with these wonderful panel members, and they assured me they know a lot about history. I have a question for everyone in the audience today. Have you ever remarked to yourself and said, I wish I had asked more questions of my parents and my grandparents? Oh, the history they could have told us. Well, today, we're going to do just that. We didn't want this 150th birthday to go by without asking some of those questions about Jacksonville's history. What we're also going to do, we're going to save some time at the end of the hour, approximately 15 minutes or more, to have time for you to ask questions of the panel. And that's what this microphone is for. So be listening and thinking what you still want to know at the end of the program. Let's give them a hand. What we're going to start with first is a question or two to put us in context. We're going to start with Shelley and then go around. And then after this first series of questions, I'm just going to call on one or two of you. We won't go like little ducks in a row after that. But the first few questions are these. You're going to start off with your full name, when you were born and where you were born, who your parents were, and their occupation. By getting a sense of your parents, that does put you in context. So your full name, when you were born, that would include the month, the day, and the year. We're going to learn how old you are, and then your parents. But Shelley, why don't you start?
Well, my name is Shamrock Shelley Cleaver, and I was born at Lone Star out here between Summerfield and Ponte, which was a stagecoach stop. Still owned the property of the house I was born in. And the doctor that brought me into the world was my uncle. He was born in 1850, so he was an old man when he come over to deliver me. He was a horse and buggy doctor and didn't know how to drive, so but my grandpa was born on Christmas Day, and so they wanted me to be born on Christmas, and my mama told him she could not wait no longer. So my uncle got in a T-model, and he went to New Salem where Dr. Barnett was and fetched the doctor back over to the place, and I was born on Christmas Eve. This is what my daddy gave my mother for Christmas, everlasting gift. Well, Daddy said they'd been hauling cotton, and had the scales hanging there on the porch, and I was a big old young'un, and said, won't see how much I weigh. I just weighed 12 pounds.
So, Shelley, did you tell us what year you were born?
Oh, well, I've lied about my age all my life. I was born in 1934. I guess I'm going to have to confess.
Okay. Thank you, Shelley. Barbara.
Well, my name was Barbara Jean Angelo, now Huggins. I was born May the 28th, 1931 in Lubbock, Texas. My daddy had just finished the first class that went through Texas Tech, but he went to work in the oil fields. Later on, he worked for the state of Texas.
Your birthday?
May the 28th, 1931. I'm past 91 years old.
Yes.
Older than you.
Dr. Bone.
Your name?
I'm trying to think about what to say about my name.
Okay.
Depends on when you knew me. Harry, what would you call me?
Pid.
Okay. Okay. My official name is Mary Alice Bone, and my husband's name was Adamson. I was born 8/30/30, and I was, when I give my birthday, when you have to do it, these various things, they say, what did you say? I said, 8/30/30 is just real easy to remember. I was born in the Nan Trappist Hospital. My father delivered me. He delivered all of his children, but I was the only one hospital born because my mother was a nurse and she was working, and it was just easier to go into the delivery room from there. he had to, we lived on Rexall Street and about half a block down from the hospital. And he was home when the nurses decided it was time for Mother to have the baby, me. And so they called him, and they were all hanging out the window because it was out air conditioned. Minnie Silva told me this story. I don't know if any of you remember Minnie Silva. She was quite a fixture at the hospital. And she they were all looking out the window to see if he was going to make it on time, and he did. So that was where I was born. As I mentioned, my father was a general practitioner in Jacksonville. He was born in Mount Selma. My mother was an RN. She was born in Washington, Georgia, and through her connection with Miss Baumberger, Lena Baumberger, who became Ms. McMahon, the administrator of nurses at Nan Travis. Mother had trained with her, and she got her to come, and so that's how they met. And that was. She also had owned a flower shop at one time, sold insurance, and didn't have a lazy bone in her body.
So, Dr. Bone, before we move on, tell us about PID, that name. We have to know.
Well, actually, it was shortened down to PID when I went to school. The true story of this, and I hate to admit that I wasn't a perfect child, but I was very curious. I had two older sisters, one 15 years older, one 19 years older. The 19-year-older one had left home, married, but the 15-year-old was still there. And she had a room of her own. She was older, and I was older when this happened. But I loved to go up in her room and play with her makeup. And one day I decided to get her lipstick out, and I drew a great big skull and crossbones on her white bedspread. I'm so sorry, Minerva, but anyway, I did that, and I had been known to go in her room before, and she had complained to Mother about it. So Mother was calling me. She was downstairs. It was an upstairs house. She came. She said, "Mary Alice, I know you're up there." So here, coming up the stairs. So I got under the bed, and it was one of those beds, a double bed, and it had the little wooden headboard, and across the wooden headboard was a little 2x4 that went all the way across, and I could cling to the little board across the top, and I could stand on the little board on the bottom. And so when she looked under the bed, she could see no little feet underneath there. So she looked under the bed. There were 2 closets in that room. She looked in all the closets. She said, "I don't know where you are, but I know you're in here. And when your brother and sister get home, I'm going to tell them to call you Piddler until that's with 2 D's, until you start acting right. And don't do this anymore. I don't want to see any more of this." So she went downstairs. So she told them. They all started, "Piddler, Piddler." So all the neighborhood kids picked it up. One day after this had gone on for a long while, Mother called me in to talk to me. She said, "I don't want you to answer to that name anymore." And I said, "But Mother, I like it better than Mary Alice." When I got to a grade school, they shortened it to PID.
Well, thank you, PID. We're going to move on now from PID. Yes.
My name is Sarah Jane Black Robinson. Birth date November 17th, 1950. I was born in Jacksonville, Texas. My mother's name, Johnny Lee Walker Black. Father's name, Jesse James Black. My mother was a domestic worker. Father was a self-employed auto mechanic, and he also taught mechanic classes.
Where did he teach the classes? Did he?
In the Jacksonville area.
Wow.
Now, I was a small kid back then, but I have pictures my mom had of him as teaching the classes.
What part of Jacksonville did you live?
We lived out at Lakeview.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters?
uh, I have 2 brothers, 3 sisters. I have a sister that's deceased and a brother that's deceased. So
Thank you
there
so
are 4
much.
of us left.
And you're the smartest of the bunch, huh?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Next, let's hear from you, please.
All right, my name is Charles Creed. I was born June 18, 1929, and I was blamed for bringing on the Depression. And Herbert Hoover was president, and I lived the first 6 years of my life in Hermitage, Arkansas, where my grandfather had a hardware store. Then we moved to Warren, Arkansas, where I grew up, finished high school there. My parents were Grace and Harold Creed. My father was a World War II veteran, and after the war, he went into the dry goods business. So that's kind of my story. I'm an only child, and my wife never lets me forget that.
Thank you, Doctor. And she's here today.
She is here, yes.
Yes, please.
I'm Hallie Jewel Henry Peoples. I was born in Jacksonville in Brown's Addition. I was born to Julian and Idabelle Henry. My father worked for Carbon Holman Lumber Company for many, many years, and he always liked to say he fired the boiler. I enjoyed going down there with him because I think I got just a little bit jealous because he would let Lumen Kent Holman drive the trucks. I never drove them, but he got to drive the trucks. So I would like to go and watch. My mother was an excellent cook, as well as did some domestic work. She worked for Mr. and Mrs. Willard Newton, and many, many parties. And I remember going with her when she would go to cook and serve for the parties. It was quite an experience because Janet had a beautiful playhouse, and we would spend much time out there while Mother was doing what she was doing. I was born, August 14th, 1940.
I have a question.
Yes.
When did you get to drive a truck or a car?
Well, finally, when I was about 10 years old, I think. But I didn't get to drive until then, and of course, I don't know how old he was. And also my name. I got my name from the doctor's wife and his nurse that delivered me. His wife was named Hallie, and his nurse was named Jewel Patton. Dr. Holland from Palestine delivered me.
Wow, it's a beautiful name. I've often wondered, but what you just said, that's a great story.
Well, one time I asked my mama, because I didn't like it too well at first. And
That sounds familiar, doesn't it, Dr. Bone?
And I said, Mama, if you hadn't named me Hallie, what were you gonna name me? She said, well, honey, she was a very dainty little lady. She said, well, honey, if I hadn't named you Hallie, I was gonna either name you Jessica or I was going to name you Priscilla. I said, thank you for Hallie, Mama.
Oh, Mr. Tilley, you're up.
I'm Harry Gordon Tilley, born December 6, 1932, in Jacksonville at Newbern Hospital. Dr. Newbern delivered me. My ancestors came from Georgia. It was told to me on several occasions that my great-grandfather, when Jacksonville moved from Gum Creek to its present location, was the first man here, and he brought the saloon with him.
Hear, hear. So your family goes back to the very beginnings of Gum Creek,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and it was a mercantile business?
Tilly and Suttles was a mercantile.
Right. And so when old Jacksonville pulled up stakes, the railroad came, and we have New Jacksonville. It was one of, as you say, one of the first businesses to come from old Jacksonville.
That's right.
And so what did your father do?
Well, my grandfather in Harry Park, Tilly, in 1904, worked for Ambrose Johnson in the drugstore, and in the back of the drugstore was a soft drink operation. In 1 October 1904, my grandfather acquired the Coca-Cola franchise for Jacksonville and surrounding areas. My father was born also in 1904, and grew up in Jacksonville. Spent some time at Texas A&M. I didn't say he graduated, but
He attended.
he attended, yes. In fact, my grandfather, they tell me, attended. But my father did grow up in Jacksonville. He met my mother in Dallas because he was working for my grandfather, who had an electrified water plant in Dallas. And they married, and then I came along several years later.
And your family became synonymous with Coca-Cola, didn't they?
They did, yes. I'm trying to think. It was on the back of the Ambrose drugstore.
Right, right.
And in the late 1920s, they moved it to South Bolton Street.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 37, my grandfather built the plant that was on Nacogdoches.
Right.
And I started working there at about age, I got paid 12.5 cents an hour.
How old were you?
Well, I was 12.
You're 12.
Yeah, I got $1 a day.
Wow. That was
Uh,
good money for a 12-year-old, huh?
Yeah, it was.
In fact, that's one of the questions we're going to ask in a minute, but you may win the blue ribbon today for the youngest, maybe not, but 12 years old on the payroll.
Well, not on the payroll. I was on my daddy's payroll.
Oh, okay.
He paid me $1 out of his pocket.
Oh, okay. Barbara, you're next.
Barbara Crossman, Barbara Ann Hoover Crossman. I was born in Dallas, Texas, at the hospital there at Baylor, and my parents moved from there to Houston and then to Turnertown to the Shell Oil Camp, where we lived for a couple of years. And then we moved to El Dorado, Arkansas, where I grew up. Us Arkansas guys, we
Right.
weren't very far apart. And I grew up there in Jackson and El Dorado, and then I went to college, and then I met my husband, Robert N. Crossman Jr. Everybody around here called him Nathan Crossman. And I was born, did I tell you the year? 1932. So I'm just now 90 years old.
So your birth, the month and the date was what?
September
September.
8th of 32. I met my husband on a blind date in Houston, and we moved to Jacksonville in 1959 because we wanted to come back to where we could have a place for small children to grow up.
Right.
And so we had Robert and Ann and Charles Crossman.
Right.
They all grew up going to school in Jacksonville. And I'm very proud of him.
Yes, and we
Yes.
may want to come back to know more about that blind date, I'm thinking. Now we're going to ask another question, and maybe anybody can raise the hand who feels so moved, but share with us your earliest memory of Jacksonville, and about what year would that have been? Yes, please.
This would have been probably 1948. I was a student at Baylor University. Would come through Jacksonville on Highway 79 on the way to Waco,
And you were living in
Warren, Arkansas.
Arkansas, on your way to Baylor.
Right. Unknown to me, I passed by the church I go to now, Central Baptist. I passed by the corner where my dental office was, and I knew where Sadler's was.
Yeah, well,
So Sadler's was one of the early memories of Jacksonville, the good pie there.
Oh, for sure. Who else would like to share an early memory? Barbara Huggins, you got one?
Surely, I came here in 1948 to go to Long March College. So my first memories are of the motel out on the highway here. I can't even think of the name of it. Starkey Motel. Yeah, that's where we spent, my mother and my friend and another lady spent the night out there. I didn't meet Gordon till a little later on, but that's one of my real good memories of Jacksonville.
yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, Dr. Bone.
Since I was born here in 1938, my earliest memories are of the house on Ragasel Street where they lived when I was born. And it was at the location where Hope, the Hope Center is on Ragasel Street. That was my childhood home. And I remember probably we moved from there to Bolton Street, very close to Gordon's family. But we lived there till I was 3. And my memories of that house is that we had an ice box, not a refrigerator, and that the ice went in the top, and there was an ice man that delivered the ice, or sometimes we went out to the ice plant and bought it, and that kept the, we had a cow in the backyard, which my father and my brother, and probably my mother, milked. And that was the source of our milk. That we had always had a cow in the yard. Didn't think anything about it. Had a little stall where the cow stayed. But one of the earliest memories that I'm so fond of, and some of you may not know this, but I'm sure you know where Bolton Park is. It's surrounded by El Paso, John Street, and South Jackson. When I was small, my 2 sisters, just older than I, would walk from our house on Ragsdale up through there where the Panda shop is, and McDonald's, not McDonald's, but whatever that up, Whataburger, yeah. We'd walk up there, and South Jackson was not that busy at all. We had no adult with us except my sister, who was she was 5 years older than me, and Aunt Ruth, who was 2 years older. And we'd walk up to Bolton Park, and there was a pond there. If you go up on the park, he's nodding, he knows but that pond has a oval cement edge, and I think it just has flowers and all in it now. But when I was a child, it had water in it, no lifeguard, just kids up there playing in the pool. My sisters were tall enough that it didn't come over their head, but I remember being short enough that it would be over my head on the deep end. So my sister Frances taught me how to swim underwater, and I learned to swim underwater before I learned to swim on top of water, because she didn't want me to drown while we were up there. So we go up there and swim, and I have no idea when they took the water out of the pool, but I remember when I swam, kept my eyes open, and it was the dirtiest water ever. But I loved that park.
And I've had people tell me in interviews they called that the plunge. And that was the swimming hole before Love's Lookout. And when Love's Lookout came, everybody was elated. It was a cement bottom and it was clear water,
Yeah.
not like the water you were learning to swim in. Let's go to another question. And Sarah, I'm going to ask this, if you don't mind, and then we'll go around to some others. But growing up, Sarah, who did you look up to and why? Who was an influence in your growing up days?
My oldest sister. Her name is Kay Francis Black Printers. And I used to go and stay with her during the summer months. And she would take care of me. So that was very important to me, her, taking care of me. And she taught me a lot about life. And she told me a lot of things about young men and like when you start dating and what to do and what not to do. Keep your dress, we used to call it dress tail. Keep your dress tail down. But yeah, she was the greatest influence in my life growing up. Now my mom, my dad died at an early age. I was about 7 when my dad passed away. Mm-hmm. And my mother, she was there. Like I said, she was a very hard worker. Mm-hmm. She would, after he passed away, she was just left to take care of us.
And she kept the
kids.
Family together.
She did. Some of her sisters wanted her to divide us up, take some of us to California, and she would keep some of us here, but she refused to do that. She kept us all together. And my oldest sister, like I said, she helped my mother out a lot. She took care of the younger kids. Mm-hmm. So she was really a great influence in my life. My mother influenced me by being a hard worker.
Right.
That was instilled in me. And I've always said, if you're a hard worker, if you get out and work, you're a hard worker, you can accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. So I was a hard worker until I retired. I can't say I'm a hard worker now. After my husband passed away back in 2019, so much changed for me. Mm-hmm. We were married for 51 years. We got married when we were teenagers. Mm-hmm. So much changed for me. So now I just kind of sit around and reminisce a lot.
But it's important, all different stages in your life, you had a mentor, someone to look up to.
Yes. I've always been a hard worker. My husband was a hard worker. So I always tell the kids, I used to own Kids R Us daycare center here in Jacksonville, and I would always tell my kids, if you're a hard worker and you put God in your life, there's not anything that you can't accomplish.
That's right.
So,
and that's well said. Yeah. So now, Hallie, the same question for you. Who did you look up to your growing up days and why?
I looked up to my godmother and my godfather. They were very, very dear to me, and in fact, they lived next door. I was, might as well say, an only child. My brother was 22 years older than I am. So by the time I was old enough to remember him, he was already in service. Mm-hmm. But my godparents, Aline and Joe Lacey, had children. They had 5 children. And until this day, they're just like my brothers and my sisters. And that's what we call each other. Mm-hmm. They realized that I was lonesome and that I didn't always want to go in the house with my mama and daddy. So they would always include me in their family get-togethers, just being at home, just whatever. Whenever I was at their house, I was at home. Mm-hmm. And of course, whenever their kids were at our house, they were at home. And I learned so many life lessons from them. Of course, they tried to teach Donna and I. Donna's the oldest daughter, which we're the same age. My godfather was a tailor. He worked for Grace Cleaners many, many, many years. And of course, my godmother, Alline Lacey, a lot of people remember her because she was a secretary out at Jacksonville High School for many years and was at Fred Douglass as well. They attempted to teach us to sew, but
Did it work?
it did not work. And the youngest girl, Janice, learned to sew, and until today, she will not sew for us. She'll sew for everybody else, but she won't sew for Donna and me. She said we had the same opportunity that she had. But I don't have very many fine motor skills. I can put a button on though. So, and I think about how they loved me and how they nourished me and how they, just whatever it was, they were there for me even after my parents died and I was older. They were there for me. I can remember going somewhere one day, this was after I was much older, and I was with them, and someone said to my godfather, said, "Joe, I didn't know you had 3 daughters." He said, "You didn't?" And that was all he said, because he accepted me, and she accepted me.
You were family.
I was, and I am still family,
Right.
and they are my family.
That's right. That's beautifully said. Now we've got a question for Shelley Cleaver. I've been saving it now. Here we go. And we may get back to Barbara Crossman in this same one, but thinking about your high school days, who was your first date and where did you go?
Okay. Glenda Gray lived next door to us there on Beaumont Street. And when her mother was out of pocket, she would play the piano, and I knew it was time to come over to see her. So I took, Glenda was my first date, lived next door to me.
How old were you this first date?
Well, we wasn't too old. I can't remember that.
Oh, okay.
But we went to high school after we got out of East Side over there in the 7th grade. We went to high school. And Glenda was instrumental in my life. She learned me a lot about the piano, you know. She would...
I thought you were going to say the birds and the bees for a second.
Well, no. I was more sort of interested in music and singing at the time. And
Okay.
I was,
Okay.
yeah, I guess that was my first romance, I guess, when I wasn't too old, but that's been my downfall in life, has always been females, I guess.
So, Shelley, before we leave your high school, talk about the Tomato Bowl and the track meet.
The Tomato Bowl, yeah, there used to be a track around the football field in Tomato Bowl. And we had the last district track meet that was held there in 1952. We won everything. I mean, we had a track team that was out of this world. I won the half mile, which is 880 yards, and then I run a leg on the mile relay, which we went on to state and set a record down at Austin. I still got my gold medal. But what really inspired me about those other 3 that run on that track team, they all smoke cigarettes, and they've been gone a long time. And my daddy caught me one time with some Bull Durham, and that's back when he sharpened his razor on the razor strap. I decided I didn't need them cigarettes. So I am a living example, and I'm still here, that the other 3 have been gone a while, that those cigarettes is bad for your body. Yeah.
Barbara, do we need to know more about the blind date, or should we move on?
Well, it was, of course, it was to Bob, and I had gone back to college after graduating from SMU, and it was just my roommate and his friend. We were all going to go to dinner together, and Bob and I sort of liked each other, and it just decided we would get married, and we moved back around after we were married to Dallas, and we were in Milwaukee for a while, and then we decided we wanted to come home and raise our kids, and that's it's really, it's very, one of those usual things, you know.
But a happy ending to a
Happy
blind
ending,
date.
that's right, exactly. And of course, we're talking about a while ago about living, things about in Jacksonville. First time I remember Jacksonville was when Bob drove me here from Houston and got there at night. And he said, if you come up over the top of the hill there at 7 Mile here, you'll be able to see Jacksonville, the lights of Jacksonville. And sure enough, they were there. And of course now, there are so many trees you can't see that. But at that time, the trees were young and I could see that. And of course, we lived next door to his mother and dad. And the house that his mother and father lived in, I was reading the abstract the other day about it, and it said that it was on San Antonio Street and the road to Lone Star.
Oh, wow.
Think how far away that was.
Right,
The road to Lone Star.
right. And Shelley,
Yes.
your family was
Yeah.
in Lone Star.
Yeah,
That road went from Jacksonville to Lone Star, and they called it the Lone Star Road.
right.
We got a map down at our historical office shows that road
Yeah.
before
Did it go through
Summerfield or
Trimrock?
Ponte was there.
Yeah.
Went to Lone Star.
I thought that was very
It had a
interesting.
school of higher learning down there, a boarding school, Institute of Higher Learning at Lone Star. It was a real
Yes.
town back in the
Mr.
stagecoach
Mr.
days.
and Mrs. Trout, or Mr. Trout lived there also.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead, and I'm going to pose a question, and we would like everybody to say a few things. But thinking about Jacksonville through the changes and so forth, could you pinpoint one significant time in history, some happening in the history of Jacksonville that's been meaningful? We're thinking 150 years. You didn't have to see it with your own eyes, of course, but just thinking of your knowledge of history, Jacksonville certainly has undergone and had a lot of significant changes. What might some of those changes be?
Well, of course, the fact that we moved from Gum Creek to Jacksonville, that we, instead of sitting around thumbing our, twiddling our thumbs, everybody just picked everything up and moved. They could have just stayed right where they were, and something else would have happened. The railroad coming through here was an extremely important thing
right.
that happened to Jacksonville.
That's
Or
right.
We came to it.
Right, Hallie?
I was about to mention the railroad as well. I remember when the train station was up there, and my mother traveled a lot because she went to a lot of meetings, and I always enjoyed going down there. If I did not go with her, with my daddy, to meet her when she came in, but I really enjoyed traveling on the train, and we did quite a bit of that. And I remember once we went to Chicago on the train, and that was quite exciting, and came back.
Wow.
And another thing that I was fascinated with here in Jacksonville was the Liberty Hotel. I don't know why I was so excited about the Liberty Hotel, but it was just fascinating to me. To me, that was the most beautifulest building anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I would love the lights at night if we would come through there, and the color. And when I finally got to go into the lobby, that just meant so much to me. So when that hotel burned, I was just devastated. Mm-hmm. And
It was a piece of Jacksonville burned.
it was,
so
it
quickly.
was, as well as the fire that was on Commerce. That was, that was really, really got to me. That really upset me when all of that burned, because those were the places where we were shopping, and those were the places that we were interested in.
Right.
And I think another place, can I tell one more? Was A&P grocery store. Mm-hmm. Now, I loved going to A&P, except when Donna, that I mentioned a bit ago, was like a sister to me, every Friday evening, we had to walk from Dorothy Street, and of course at that time, Dorothy Street was Adolphus Street. We walked from up there to A&P and bought, I don't know if anybody liked these or know about them, but it was whiting fish. We had to go down there and buy that. Every Friday we would go back home, our moms would cook it, and we had to eat it. And we said, we will never, ever eat whiting fish again when we get grown. But we had to take that back because there was a dear lady here, Mrs. Melvin Sealman, opened a cafe up on the corner of Main Street and Lincoln Street. And she cooked whiting fish, and we loved it well enough that we would stand in line to get the whiting fish. But A&P was one of my favorite places to go. Certainly did miss it, and for those that don't know, it was up where Austin Bank is now. First National Bank, I think, was just up on the corner. But A&P was just behind there, and you had to go up a set of steps to get up to the store. It's quite different there now, but we're glad to have Austin Bank there.
That's right.
Yes, we are.
Let's think about maybe combining something. We're talking about a significant historical time or occurrence in Jacksonville. Let's keep that in our mind, but also pair it with any advice. We're getting close to the end, but any advice you would have, your vast experience that you would like to give to future generations. This is being recorded, and we're going to put all of this in the time capsule. Now, I don't think too many of us are going to be around in 50 years, but you have an opportunity, and we want everybody to chime in on advice. But who would like, Barbara, you want to go with this?
Yes, and I'm going to back up just a little bit.
Please.
They were talking about the railroad.
Yes.
And today, I think they say 25 trains a day go through Jacksonville. Something that really, really made a big difference in Jacksonville was the overpass, because you used to spend a lot of time at the crossings. So the overpass, and I'll just say, along with that, that was a change. That was a big change for Jacksonville. And we've had many changes, many of which were very difficult. But time goes by and we have to have these changes. So if you can learn to just sort of accept changes when they come.
So that would be your advice?
That would be my advice. Learn to accept the changes that come along.
Good. Mr. Tilley, how about you? Advice or?
Well, get a good education.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best thing I can say for anybody, is to get a good education. My brother, who was about 13 years younger than I am, graduated from A&M, married a Dallas girl, and held several jobs in the banking industry. They were in Chicago, they were in Indiana, they were in California, came back to Fort Worth to retire. But both of them have done well in the banking business.
And Mr. Tilley, you got a good education as well, didn't you, in terms of practical things in the plant?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, when I came out of the Army in 1957, my father announced in the paper that I was going to be the sales manager. Well, I took a pay cut when I came out of the Army. But, you know, I had to learn the business from the ground up.
That's right.
And that was in the plant, on a truck.
And so there's so much education in learning the business and dealing with people and...
Yeah. You know, you dealt with people from alto to troop to ARP, over to Frankston, and Maydale, Dyeville.
all over.
All over,
Right.
you know.
And you were
Yeah.
somebody they enjoyed seeing the truck come because you had the Coca-Cola.
That's right.
Let's move on. Doctor, how about advice or a significant time in history or?
We moved here in 1956 when I got out of the Air Force. So a lot of things were already happening. But to me, something I sensed was when Nichols Industry moved here, they ran 3 shifts a day and probably employed 500 to 600 people. There have been a lot of spin-offs from that. And it was a time, I think, when Jacksonville was a little more industrial and not as much agricultural. And I think they made a difference in the companies that have evolved from that now that are still here.
Right.
As far as advice, set goals, work hard, be able or be willing to spend a lot of time to do things, because sometimes if you're willing to go an extra mile to do something, it'll open a lot of doors that otherwise wouldn't open. And as far as advice, when I started the college, my mother handed me it's a card. I still have it in my Bible. It says, lean not to your own understanding, but commit yourself to God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good path for anybody.
That's right. Well said. Dr. Bone, advice?
Can I back up a minute
Sure,
to the
please.
thing that I think may change for
yeah,
the better
change.
in
Uh-huh.
Jacksonville, just for 1 minute?
Sure.
Integration of the schools. It brought 2 communities really together as one, I think. I could add to that, but I won't. The other thing about advice, first thing that popped into my mind was a story, and it was about a patient of mine, and I noticed every time I would drive by, when Travis Towers was just built, there was a little corner there, and she would be out there just working in the hot sun, an elderly woman, and just work in the hot sun, planting, digging, and I'd just go down that alley, and I'd marvel at her. She was out there day in and day out. She came into my office one day, and I said, why are you working so hard on that corner? And she said, I'm trying to brighten the corner where I am. Mm-hmm. And I remembered a little song that we sang in Sunday school and Bible school. And I Googled that today. And that song was written by Ella Fitzgerald.
Wow.
I didn't know that till I looked it up. But and I won't take the time to read it. But just briefly, the chorus says, brighten the corner where you are. Someone far from harbor, you may guide across the bar. Brighten the corner where you are.
Right.
So that's a good thing to do.
It's very good. Now, who else would like to add before we open up to the audience? Any advice or a significant moment in time? Sarah, did you have anything else to offer? Advice or?
I'd like to make a comment on change, a
Okay.
change for the better. It would go back to civil rights.
Mhm.
When I was small, and Hallie knows about this as well, there was so much differences in the way different races were treated. And I can remember as being a child, and we would go to the Palace Theater, and the black kids would have to, well, all black people would have to sit up top, and the white people would sit down at the bottom. And then I can remember we used to go to this store called Peterson's grocery store on Bolton Street, and there was a little hamburger place there. And I never could understand why the black people would have to go to the back of the store to get a hamburger. And we couldn't go on the inside. And, you know, when I was a small child, I didn't understand, but as I got older, it was explained to me, and I did understand, you know, why we couldn't go on the inside. So, for the better, the civil rights law was passed, and now we have equal opportunity to do the same things as all the other races are allowed to do. So, that's a change for the better for our race.
Right.
So I don't want to offend anybody, you know. I don't want to be negative, but this is the way
It was.
things used to be.
That's right. And we need to comment on that
Yeah.
and look at the growth. How do you want
Yeah.
to say something?
Yes, I've seen so many changes in Jacksonville. I've seen a lot of positive changes. I'm not saying that we did not have anything negative going on in Jacksonville, but there have been so many positive changes. I think when I went to work at Nan Travis Memorial Hospital, when I was in nursing at that time, and I was working, I was taking care of everybody on the floor, I was associating with the nurses, and I wanted to go to the restroom. And one of the nurses told me, "You'll have to go back over to Fred Roy to go to the restroom." Dr. Ty Boyd was sitting there. He said, "She works on this unit, she'll go to the restroom on this unit." I appreciated that, and I will never forget him for that. And my days at Nan Travis Hospital, I am just so thankful for them. I thank God, and I give him for the glory for the way I was treated there, because I was accepted as part of the Nan Travis family. Not only me, but there were several other ladies, black ladies that were working there, and I know that I was just impressed with the way that I was treated there and the way I had been treated or had seen others treated at other places. So I've seen a lot. I've lived through a lot here. But I always say, I think that Jacksonville showed more compassion and more love. Most of the people. As I said, yes, we had negative incidents.
Right.
But where I was,
Right.
I saw love and I saw compassion.
Remind me again, how long were you at Nan Travis?
Well, when you put all of the years
Right.
together,
Right.
about 54 years
Wow.
or a little bit.
Wow. Wow.
And,
Such a
and
record.
I must say that Nan Travis opened many doors for me. And I'm just so grateful, and I thank God for that experience. And I would say to anyone, love your fellow man and trust God. When I was in school, we had to learn Invictus in the 6th grade. And you know, it said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." I changed that when I read Dorothea Day's poem. For Christ is the master of my fate. Jesus the Christ is the captain of my soul. And as Dr. Creed said, that was one thing that I was taught. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. That's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I tried to admonish that in all of my kids that I taught in Sunday school.
Right.
And I leave that with Jacksonville. And no matter what, I will always love Jacksonville. I thank God for allowing me to be a part of Jacksonville, Texas.
They deserve a big round of applause. what we want to do is have you state your name. We won't ask you your birthday, but state your name.
I'm Joe Angle. I was born September the 1st, 1945. A number of years ago, I had a conversation with Raymond Doc West, and in that conversation, he alluded to a place that was a cafe called the Sour Rag Cafe. And I was thinking, how could this be? So I need some confirmation that it really existed. That's
Okay, it was on Zimmerman Street, what's Zimmerman Street now? And it was owned by the relatives of Paul Pavlitic. His grandparents really, had that little cafe. And the railroad track road came through there.
Was there a roundhouse around there someplace?
No.
No, it was just the railroad?
It was just the railroad came through. But people would stay at, I don't know if it was in the Sour Rag or next door to the Sour Rag, but it was just a little cafe.
Well, did it have a sign that said that?
It's on the sidewalk over there, you can see.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
And
There's
Joe,
steps. There's steps over there
Joe,
still.
a couple of weeks ago,
On Zoom.
I submitted an article to the Jacksonville Progress about Paul and Becky Pavlitic. I had worked with them. They came to the old Jacksonville City Cemetery about 4 or 5 months ago before he got ill. And we walked the cemetery, and the last name of that family who owned the Sour Rag was Taylor. And so that whole story was in the Jacksonville paper a couple of weeks ago. And of course, Paul sadly has passed away. But no, it seems so unusual to have a place that was so well known for good food to be called the Sour Rag.
Who knew?
But
Who
there
knew?
was such a place, yeah.
Yeah. Deborah, there was a book written that's, here I am. Hey, your mother.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, I'm her. Can I just say, at the old Jacksonville City Cemetery Sunday, we had the walk through history. I was Dr. Bones' mother, so she just called me Mother. Can I speak?
There's a child's book, and I think there's a copy in the library, or the Vanishing Texas Museum maybe, but it's called How Much Further to Jacksonville? And it's a story of this little boy who was coming to visit his folks here, and he talks about getting off the train and eating at the Sour Rag. And when I was a child, we played over there. My house was not too far. We were on Bolton, and we'd go over and play on those steps. And there was a nice, I used to call it a cliff, but we could get little boxes and slide off it on the weeds and go down the side of it. But that little book is just, I have a copy of the Frances Smurl, do you know?
Right, of course. Of
Yeah,
course.
well,
And there is one in the library, too.
She has a little thing in there because it's part of her relatives, and her daughter still lives here.
Right.
And anyway, it's just, they have a lot of history about the train over there in the hotel and the cafe.
Right. Any other comments of anybody? We're gonna maybe, anything? Another question perhaps before we, Shirley Reese, surely you have a question.
I think they've answered everything. Fabulous.
Let's give them a big hand. We've finished for today. Oh, here we go. We've still got another comment.
Down on Bolton Street, going south, down where Canada. Who had the little store down there?
Charlie Watts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's what
I have a picture of me and little Charlie sitting on my lap on the steps there, and I sent a copy to the Wallworks, Judy Seaman there, and I love that little store. They had a just a little grocery store, and they lived in the store. And Mr. Watts, which we always called him Mr. Watts, died at a very early age from a heart attack, and it was just devastating. Kids loved him. He was quite a people person, and especially with little children. But Ms. Watts continued operating the store for a long time. And we had a charge account there, my family did. And any of us could go in there, the lady that did domestic work for my mother while she was working, supposed to look after us. And she would go down in charge. And anything we need, then my father would go by once a week or once a month or whatever and give them some money for it. And it was so handy. But I want to tell you about my first job, and that was my sisters and I had a little Coca-Cola stand out on Bolton Street.
I remember.
Yeah, and the Coke plant would give us one of those ice boxes. Of course, we had to buy our own ice, and we'd go down and get a case of mixed drinks and stand out there and sell them all till either we got tired or ran out or we drank them all up. I think we drank up all of our profits.
Of course, you lived at the top of, I lived on Love Avenue.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why one block street was an avenue, but, and my grandfather was, of course, right around the corner, but I do remember that. And I remember my mother would give me a penny, and I could walk up to this Watts grocery store and get a bubble gum or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I would
She
get.
always had something for a penny.
This is on South Bolton Street, about the 800 block going south. And right now, it's where Judy Simon Simmons, whatever, has her art shop, but it's a building. The highway department offered Miss Watts to buy her place, and she wouldn't sell it, so they cut it in two in order to widen that street.
Judy's. Yep. Yeah, and then Judy has her wall work business there. And,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't know, somebody still lives in there, Barbara, don't they?
I don't know, she
It's
owns
fixed,
the
it's
building.
fixed
Yeah.
like an
Yeah.
apartment too.
Yeah.
But,
And that's all we know about South Bolton Street, right, Terry?
Not really.
Do you remember Bando Candy Company
Oh,
being
yeah.
on South Bolton
Uh-huh.
Street?
That was uptown.
It was on the alley between Travis Towers.
And that's what they call it, Bando's Candy
Bando,
Kitchen.
yes,
Yeah.
it was
He
on
was the one
Bolton
that come
and
out
then
with that,
Yeah.
of that bar that they started making up at Hawkins later.
Hawkins
But he was the
Special.
one that invented that
Yes.
bar with them peanuts in it, you know?
Yes,
I used to couldn't wait till I got a nickel to get me one. You know?
That's two different stores. Bando's was a coffee. I mean, a chocolate. Yeah, no, it was just made candy, and it was right across the street from my house. There where Hope is. There. And we'd go over there and buy that stuff. And I was so brokenhearted. There were two different stores. Yeah.
Uh-huh. You have something? We're going to be here till midnight, Magno. It's been wonderful, and thank you all for coming. And I encourage you to visit with the celebrities too before you say goodbye.